Hi, I'm indie fantasy author Melinda Kucsera, and in this episode of Fantasy, Lore, and More, Joshua Blum is back, and we're going to talk about his podcast called the 13th Hour, and also he's going to tell us about how he makes toys that are inspired by his books and his characters, and various other things. So welcome, and let's talk about this.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, Melinda. Happy to be back.
Yeah. Last time he was here talking about his book, Empty Hands.
Yeah. So that's yeah, absolutely. That's one of the books in the series, I guess you could say.
I could visualize the cover. Like,
yeah.
So if you scroll back through the podcast, you'll find Joshua Blum's first interview on Empty Hands.
I think it was
do that after you hear this.
I think episode 100, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. Oh, I had the episode numbering is off because I removed a couple of ones of. I was trying to do an audiobook for Cursebreaker Enchanted, and Audible I had to give me all this grief, so I had to take down some of the where I was reading it, so I took down 20-something episodes, and then the whole thing kind of just fell apart. I didn't talk about it in the podcast because the whole thing just kind of fell apart. The fees and the contract, everything was just the whole thing just fell apart.
Yeah, some of your earlier episodes, right? Like
yeah. So they're down, and the audiobook right now is not going forward for the moment. We got bogged down in like it was royalty share, but they wanted all this extra money on top of it, and then they would still get paid 50% of the revenue for 7 years. And I was like, if you're getting 50% of the revenue, why would you? I'm not giving you this extra fee on top of it. It was thousands of dollars that I don't have. It was like the whole point of royalty share is I don't have the money to pay for outright for an audiobook.
Yeah.
So the whole thing just got it was the price tag was just I didn't have the money and I had no way of coming up with it. So I just had to end it. So right now their human narrated audiobook is dead in the water at the moment. Unless they can find some other way of doing it. It's not going to be thousands and thousands of dollars and a royalty share on top of that.
Right. Oh my God. What a mess when money gets involved with it.
Yeah. And then I heard some people, once that royalty share ends, you might have to buy out their contract. And I was like, what was the point of the royalty share then? Like the whole thing was just too sketchy, and they weren't they were like, oh, but we're not asking, I'm only asking for like $100 or $200 an hour. And I'm like, yeah, but Cursebreaker Enchanted is almost 170,000 words, and if you divide that by 9,000, which it's a human narrated audiobook, it's 9,000 words in an hour approximately. That's a lot. That's like about 16, 17 hours.
Yeah. You
times that by $100 or $200, and I do not have that kind of money. Yeah. Plus a 7-year royalty share. I was like, the whole thing was just adding up to impossible. And I was like, the ebook is free, so the book is not generating income to pay for this. I didn't mean to get into all this. So Empty Hands was episode 100, but I think now it's in like the 70s because I removed 20-something chapters of Cursebreaker Enchanted that I had narrated myself.
Yeah. Well, that's actually how my podcast got started. Is like I just read, kind of like you. I just read. I read like it wasn't a final draft. It was an earlier draft of the first one I did called the 13th Hour. Hence the name, the 13th Hour podcast.
Did you start re-editing it as you're reading it? Because that's the problem I ran into when I stopped reading it on the podcast. Because I've already redone the book 3 times. It's the 3rd edition is what is in stores. I started doing a 4th edition, and I was like, wait, we need to stop. We need to stop. There has to be a point at which we leave this poor book alone. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that some of the ways, the phrasing and stuff is not how I write now. It's not wrong. It's grammatically correct. It's just not how I write now. And I was but it was written originally in 2016, and I redid it in 2020 or 2019. I think it was one or the other. like we need to just leave it alone and just let it be an artifact in time, marking how I was writing at the last time I redid the book.
Sure. Maybe one day, like, you know, you can make the omnibus version or something like that. You know, but I mean, like, you know, you're right. Like, you change, you know, and if you always go back and continue to edit and revise and everything, which is totally possible to do now, right?
It's too easy.
It's too seamless to continue to patch your own books in the way that like software programmers do, you know?
Yes.
So, but at some point you got to say like, okay, enough is enough. I got to move on and do something else.
Well, yeah, we all have so many things we want to write, you know, and I need to just keep going forward because everything I write is in the same world, takes place in the same country around the same time. I start redoing something that's, you know, the now in this world is whatever book I'm currently working on.
Yeah.
So going back and revising a previous book means I have to keep all the stuff from now there's 26 books that have come after it in my head, redo this thing, then step away from that back to the next book that moves everything forward and remember what happened in all those books that came after this one that I spent time messing around with. And I was like, we just need to, readers would prefer that I keep moving the needle forward and keep going forward and seeing what these crazy characters do next.
Well, one of the, I guess, like, to answer your question, the first one was that, did I edit the podcast or the book as I was reading out loud? And yeah, I would, because that was the whole point. Initially, I never intended to do a podcast. You know, back like at that time, like podcasts were kind of like a very, very small niche thing, and a lot of people didn't really know what they were. And so I was recording, but it was really for the sole purpose of hearing myself read out loud. I mean, I think we talked about this last time. And then
it's good to rehash. Go on.
Yeah. I would pause, make whatever typo correction or, you know, grammar correction I needed to, and then just resume recording. And then eventually, you know, I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll do something more with this particular audio platform that I have. But that's how I initially edited the like a fairly final edit of the book. And it took about 15 episodes, if I recall correctly, which each is about an hour. So, you know, reading it. And I think I remember trying to mess around with different voices and, you know, stuff like that. I'm not an actor or anything like that.
Either.
But I had fun, you know, kind of doing it. And I remember
Did you wish you had a smaller cast? Did you start thinking about killing off characters just so you don't have to voice that?
Oh, no. I enjoyed it, but I remember thinking like, how do I make like, because the story is told from the 13th Hour is told from 2 points of view, and one of it is female. And I was trying to think like, how do I make, am I going to like read it in like a higher pitch that would sound like fake or really annoying? And so I'm trying to remember what I did. I think I ultimately did not alter my voice that much for those particular segments. But I think for some of the other characters where, you know, I could be more like overt about it, I did. And that was kind of fun. So.
That's cool. I'm just, you're each episode on your podcast for the Empty Hands book was 1 hour long. I was after like 10 or 20 minutes, I was like, I can't read anymore.
Yeah, well,
I started like stumbling over everything. Like even the word "the" became like, you know, like, I don't know, like my mouth seemed to like disconnect from my brain, and like my brain would be like, hey, this is what you need to say. And somehow like gibberish would come out of the mouth.
Right.
It was like, I don't remember how to pronounce this word.
Yeah, so Empty Hands was like almost like a short story, like a novella, and it came several years later. But the 13th Hour was the one that I did, and it's you know, it's a sizable book. I think I forget how many words it is, but I mean, you know, reading it, you know, like I said, took about 15 15 or 16 hours. And I think each episode I tried to keep around an hour, because I did try to edit the episodes a little bit, you know, as I was going along. My skill with editing audio at the time was fairly rudimentary, but I tried to eliminate the uhs and long pauses and stuff like that, at least. And so, yeah, I think it might have been 100, maybe 140,000 words, maybe, or something like that. I don't know if that's accurate, but
I mean, yeah, it's possible.
Book, yeah. I have a copy of the book right here.
That's possible. Like if you were reading for an hour and it was about 14 or 15 episodes, then it would be about 140, 150,000 words.
This copy is
roughly
336 pages. So of, I don't know, like 11-point type. So
yeah, like that's the thing. Like since we format our books, like we can make the font and the line spacing anything we want as indie authors, and we tend to make things a bit more readable than traditional publishing does. Yeah. So page counts are not as like, it's not apples to apples when indie authors compare their page counts to other authors, because we decide all those things. It's not like the traditional publishing where like it doesn't matter like which publisher it is, they're all using font 10 with like almost no line spacing.
Right. Well, I had
super tiny margins. Yeah.
I wanted some big margins, and I wanted I had pictures to fill in there. So, you know, like when you have pictures, every time you change something, edit it, the picture gets moved around. So I had to like continually like finagle where I would put the pictures so that it actually sort of semi-made sense based on the flow of the paragraphs. You know, like if you have the picture and then the text that it references is actually several pages back, that doesn't really make sense. But sometimes it doesn't necessarily always work to stick it where you want it to work based on how the page layout will be in the printed version. And the ebook, it doesn't matter, but with the printed version, that's a little bit more of a hassle. So I remember doing a lot of finagling with that. I'm sure you know.
Well, I use Microsoft Word to format, and like it's really easy once you figure it out. Like the first time you do it, it's a little bit complicated only because you don't know where everything is. But once you've done it once, it's really easy to format a book in Microsoft Word, like stupid easy. Because once you get it, when you start your next book, you just set up certain things before you do anything. And at the end, there's so little you have to do. It's laughable. It's so I do. Yeah, it's for that because I know people don't use all sorts of like other software and stuff, but like
I use Word as well.
In 2016, when I first started publishing, there was only Microsoft Word. There was not Vellum, there was not Atticus. All these other things didn't exist, so we were all using Microsoft Word. And by the time other things came out, it was like, it's so fast and easy to do it on Word. I'm not spending several $100s and getting back in a cloud account so that I can use Vellum, when it takes like 10 minutes in Microsoft Word once you know how to do it.
Right. Yeah. And I think like the whole desire to make toys and stuff like that really came out of the fact that when I put this all together, I envisioned something that was a little bit more interactive than a book could offer. And I guess, what I was sort of looking for was maybe an ebook or something like that. But even so, it wasn't not necessarily as kind of fully formed as what I envisioned in my head. And I guess the best way I can describe it is that when I was growing up, when you saw a movie, often there would be one of these cheap little kind of like not very well written in some cases novel that went with the movie, right? It was something that you could take home, because for the movie to come out, on VHS or whatever would probably be quite a few months. So there was always like a side sort of thing that was more physical. And I remember when I was first getting into this a number of years ago, the idea of a ebook, because it was not a physical thing, it was just something that would exist in a digital format to be read on a computer. And now, of course, you could read them on your phone or whatever, but it just felt kind of like unsatisfying. And so even the physical thing, if you remember back then, it was fairly limited what you could do. The books were set up for basically text. If you had illustrations, you could work them in, but they weren't necessarily all that great. It was black and white only. If you wanted to do stuff in color, it was going to be a lot more expensive, and the resolution may not necessarily be great. And so you were sort of left with a product that was like a shade of what you kind of envisioned. And so I guess I remember thinking back to when I was a kid, when there were all these tie-in properties for books and movies. And often there was like, if it were a popular thing, there might be a comic book, and there would probably be action figures and music, you know, and those little records that would have the storybook that you would play on the Fisher-Price record set or whatever. There was all these different things that went with stuff. And so I wondered what would happen. Could I actually make 3D, like, you know, visual representations of my characters from the book? Because that felt more tangible. And initially I was like, well, could I just, you know, make them out of Play-Doh or something like that? I had no idea. I've never done really any kind of sculpting or anything like that before. But eventually I was like, well, actually, there are ways to do this. And I kind of discovered that if you were willing to invest a little bit of time, you could actually teach yourself how to sculpt with air drying clay. And then from that, you could actually create little, basically miniatures that you could either just leave as is, or you could actually learn to make copies of them. And so I ended up getting into making molds of the little clay figures that I made, and then casting them out of resin, of essentially plastic.
Oh, okay. Were you using the resin that I've seen where people have to pour two things together and mix it? And
yeah. So when you buy the resin, and it comes in, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of resins out there.
There's like UV ones, like, which I think is so neat. You just put this UV light over it and that dries it. I think that's so wild.
Yeah. There's tons of them. If you go on any kind of social media and you type in resin art, you often find tons of really cool little like pendants and jewelry and things like that, bookmarks that people will make, often out of clear resin, because the resin will dry hard and not sticky, but you can stick all kinds of things in there, glitter, pictures, whatever.
Yeah, I've seen one with like little flowers, which I thought was so neat. When I tried it, the flower died before the resin dried.
Yeah, so it does take a little bit of playing around, you know, to find something like that will work. And but you can do the same process for something that is a little bit more intricate, that's not just flat. So if you wanted to create like a three-dimensional, you know, like a person basically, or a dog or a dragon or whatever, you have to kind of figure out, how am I going to make the mold in such a way that actually allows all the parts to fill? And that also usually means that you have to create the initial sculpture in such a way that it is actually possible to be cast. Because sometimes if it's too intricate or there's too many protruding pieces, things will not necessarily come out right. So it's like it's sort of a thing in itself to learn how to do that, but it's totally possible to teach yourself how to do that. I did it over the course of probably a couple months, and there's plenty of tutorials out there, thankfully, on YouTube, where people are showing what they do and how they do it, and that makes it totally possible to learn yourself. But it's like we were talking, you know, before, it's like offline. It's like when you try these things, it's a process of experimentation. You try something, oh, it didn't work, and then you try it again until you finally get it.
Just don't do what I did and like accidentally pour resin all over the table, and then everything got stuck to it because the resin was clear. And I don't have the greatest vision in the world. Even with glasses on, I didn't realize that everything was covered in resin, and I walked away. I got annoyed and I threw down the gloves, and so everything was permanently attached to the table.
Yeah,
it is gloves, messy. The bottles. Messy. Yeah, don't be Melinda. Be a little more careful.
So it helps to have a well-ventilated area if you want to do this sort of stuff. It helps to have a well-ventilated area that you can afford to get messy, and it really helps to make sure you don't tie back any loose hair, wear clothes that can get dirty, that you could potentially throw out, and then to have gloves. Gloves are really helpful.
Yeah, because you are playing with chemicals, so gloves are a definite necessity, and it smells really bad, the resin. So the well-ventilated area is a must.
Yeah, it depends what you get.
Yeah, my one try at this.
Yeah, it depends what you get. So there's a whole bunch of different brands out there, and so you can totally find ones out there that do not smell, but it's still helpful to have, like, you know, an area that's if you're that is well ventilated, that you can get messy. You don't want to be doing it like in probably not your kitchen, you know, probably not your place where you're going to be eating. But once you so it's a process. I guess I can show you kind of what I'm talking about. So this was the first guy that I cast. So this guy is Logan, the character from my book, The 13th Hour, and is one of basically the main protagonist. And it was originally
So you sculpted him?
I did. I can actually get the mold, and
so you sculpted him and then used the resin to make a mold.
The resin is something you pour inside the mold.
Oh, okay. So you have to use that putty thing I've seen people on YouTube use to make the mold.
Here, I'll actually get the pieces of it and I can kind of show you.
Okay.
So this is the very first one that I did, that same guy that I mentioned. So this is, you can see it looks basically the same, but it's in clay. And what I did was I used a kind of clay that you mix together two parts. So it's basically like an epoxy. And
that's the word. I was like, there's a word that I'm not remembering.
So there's a little wire skeleton in here that's basically made out of paper clips. So in order for the clay to basically glom onto something, I created the pose that I wanted, and then I basically started attaching the clay to it, and then I let it dry. So some of the initial details and things like that were done basically when the clay was still malleable, before it hardened. And this kind you don't need to put in the oven. It will just dry on its own after about an hour or so. So you have about an hour before it starts to harden. After it hardens, you can still work on it, but you have to use different tools. So when the clay is still malleable, you can use things that allow you to basically press or kind of scrape very easily. But afterwards, after it's hard, then you have to use things like files and so forth to kind of like scrape things away, file them away. So a lot of the small details I put in initially, but I had to do a lot of the finishing work afterwards to get it to kind of look right.
Right. That's really neat.
So I was looking for, I guess a look was the sort of thing you might get out of a gumball machine.
Okay.
In a little capsule. So
yeah.
If you ever had like little pencil topper type of things, little rubber things that would go on the top of your pencil, or you go to like, I don't know, Kmart or something like that, and you'd put in a quarter and get one of those little capsules, and there'd be like a little toy in there. There were these figures in the 80s called, they were like little wrestlers, muscle.
Yes, I remember those.
And they were made out of a sort of a rubbery substance. And they didn't have any articulation. Like the joints didn't move at all, but the limbs kind of could bend a little bit. And I remember having a can of those, and I remember really liking those. So I was sort of channeling something like that, where it's like a static figure. A lot of these things in the 80s were made out of PVC, which was kind of bendable. And, you know, I think I had a figure like this of E.T. I had a bunch of robots. So I was sort of channeling something like that. So, you know, if you make one of these kind of things like that, and you're fine with just making one, then, you know, you're good. You can paint it, you can do whatever you want with it, but it's made of clay. Even though when it hardens, it's actually pretty strong, but if you drop it, there's a good chance, like if it's small, like here you can see like the hand or whatever, and like there's another one here. The small parts may in fact break.
Oh, okay. So
it's still kind of like, you know, brittle in a way. It won't like flex. So when you make a mold of it, and I have 1/2 of a mold here, this is basically a block of silicone, and it comes again also in 2 parts. So like an epoxy type of thing, where you basically put this guy, your initial clay sculpt, in like a little tray, and then you have to kind of figure out how you want to make your mold. In this particular one, I used 2 parts. So there's he basically fits in here, kind of like that. That's like,
oh, I see. So one mold is the back and one mold is the front.
Yeah. So if you look at a lot of toys that you might have had as a kid, you'll often see a little seam line down the middle where there was 2 halves of a mold. And this is probably a metal mold that was used for injection molding of plastic. They had to come together and fit together just right. And then they would inject basically liquefied plastic in there, and it would harden. And so this is the same idea, but it's done you don't need special machinery to do this. So in this particular instance, I used a 2-part mold to make this guy, but you don't necessarily need to do that in this particular case. I did. So this is 1/2 of it. And once you have made the mold, now you'll have basically like 2 halves. So here's another one.
Oh.
And they kind of fit together like this. So this is this character. This is the female character in the 13th Hour. Her name is Aurora. And so she fits in here like this.
Okay, and that's another one that's in 2 parts, front and back. Cool.
Right. And you'll see that there's a hole right here.
Yeah, what's that for?
So that's the area where now you have two parts, right? A part A and a part B, and you leave a little hole because that's the spot where you're going to pour the resin in.
Oh, okay. So you have your mold, and I guess you secure them so they stay together, the 2 halves. Then you pour the resin into the hole that's in one of the sides. I guess it would be like laying down and clamped in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have to figure out because it's all based on gravity. How is gravity going to allow the liquid resin to flow into this mold and then fill all the different parts? That's so cool. It's easiest if you have a very simple kind of shape, like a circle or something like that. You don't have too much to worry about. But if you have a more intricate like design, like for example, like this character is holding, like her arm is right here, her feet are right here, and you can't see too well with the camera, but you can see like her nose and so forth. There's all these different small details that you have to kind of plan for how the resin is going to potentially get trapped in parts of the mold. And so you have to put some vents. And if you look at people who make molds, like if you go to like Italy or whatever, and you see how they made molds of big statues, you'll see like they often will do it in multiple parts, but you'll see these little vents in the mold to allow air to escape. So as the resin goes in, the air that's already in there has to escape and be pushed out. And so you have to leave some vents for that to happen. And so it takes some trial and error to kind of figure out like where to put the vents based on the design of your sculpture.
Oh, wow. How many tries did you go through before you were figured it out?
Once you've done a couple, like I have no idea, like, because I think like this guy I did was my first. I made a bunch of copies of him, and I saw what worked. I saw what didn't. I'm not really sure how long that take.
You were just so determined that you didn't even. There was no stopping. There was no. If 6 tries we don't get it, we move on. There was like, nope, I'm gonna keep doing this till it's done, yeah. And I get what I want.
I forget how many I made of this first. After a while, the mold will break down. You know, it will not. As you can see, like this one is falling apart at this point. It's
oh, okay.
Like
yeah, it's like cracked.
No longer intact. But so it probably was quite a few. But after a while, you kind of have a sense, like parts that are sticking out, you'll probably need to plan for. Like, for example, this hand right here. If you just have this with audio, this is a character that's riding a hoverboard, which is long and pointy, kind of looks like a surfboard, and he has 2 hands out for balance. This figure is about less than 2 inches tall. And so the air vents are going to be kind of small just by the nature of that. And he's got a lot of hair that's kind of that's flowing like as he flies through the air. And so each of these little points, like for example, the hands here will probably require like a vent there. There'd probably be like something on the nose because that's protruding. Mm-hmm. And so after a while, you kind of get a sense like what you need to do. And it's pretty easy to plan for as you're making the actual mold itself. But it does take some trial and error. And so it definitely goes better if you have a sculpt that is less complicated.
Yeah. So I guess if something is protruding, just put a vent there. If it doesn't work, then you could always take it away in your next trial. But it sounds like, you know, just assuming there might need to be a small event there is not a bad idea.
This was the most complicated one I did. And this is the character of Beverly from Howard the Duck. And she's, I intended this to be a very simple one, and it turned out to be the exact opposite. I intended to be something that was fairly 2-dimensional. But instead, for whatever reason, I don't know why, she's holding a guitar, which is a long, thin neck, which is not a good idea. She's also holding the guitar away from her body, which obviously makes it more complicated. And there's a tiny little guitar strap in there, which you probably can't see, but it's sticking out. It's not flush with the body. These are all things that, as you're designing the initial sculpture, would be good to actually consider. And for whatever reason, I just went crazy with this one and decided to make it as complicated as I possibly could. It turned out fine, but when I actually made the mold for this one, the mold did not survive very long because it was so intricate. And as you're pulling every time you pull you open the mold up, whether you're using a 1 or 2 piece mold, and you have to extract the resin, the hardened resin figure out of it. You're gonna flex the mold, and eventually it's just gonna break. You know, so if you have a very intricate mold that requires you to kind of like pull and whatever, it's not gonna last very long. So you can definitely make life easier for yourself, and also consequently make life harder for yourself. But, you know, I mean, it's all part of the fun, I guess.
So think about your future self. And if you don't want your future self to be cursing out your past self, maybe don't get too complicated with the first few toys.
Yeah.
Or tries.
Yeah. You know, so, I mean, so I guess the bottom line for a lot of this stuff is that I accomplished my goal, which was to make like physical figures of the characters in my books and a bunch of other things like for example, this Howard the Duck figure or character. When people see this sort of thing, like they ultimately they'll see like essentially like a little piece of plastic, because that's what is put out. I made it so that this figure like glows in the dark. I use a special kind of resin for that, but ultimately it's just a little piece of plastic that doesn't move.
Right.
So it's going to have the most appeal to people who have, already know the story and so forth. Probably not so much for people who are totally new to it. They're going to be, oh, that's cool, but it just looks like a piece of plastic that,
Well, it's a statue.
It's a statue, essentially, right? And so it doesn't necessarily do a whole lot. But I think, like, I look back to like when I was a kid, a lot of the toys that I had, they didn't really necessarily do a whole lot. It was mostly in your imagination that you had the play. That was where the play part came from. So,
but you could try making action figures.
I did. So I did.
It sounds like you've mastered armature in its basic level.
Yeah. So I mean, so I was like, eventually I was like, okay, well, so I got this part down. Is it possible to make figures that actually move? And the answer is yes. And there's a huge, I don't want to say industry, but a huge community that does this. A lot of it's around custom figures. So like if you want a figure of, I don't know, some comic book character that only exists in, is not mass produced, right? It's not made by any particular established company. You might be able to commission somebody who does this kind of work. And there's a number of people who do it to make the character for you. And what they'll do is a process of, it's actually fairly similar. In some cases, they'll probably start with a figure, a so-called blank, that it doesn't look at all like what the final product will be, but they'll use clay and other things. They'll add on to it to kind of start to sculpt and make it look like what you want it to look like.
Oh, wow.
So, for example, like this was the first one I did. This is that same character. So Logan here is right here, and this is the character here. It was a GI Joe that I found at a flea market or something like that, and it can move and everything like that. But that was what I did was I used the same process of adding the epoxy clay onto certain parts to create the look that I wanted. And once that was done, I painted it. And
cool.
So then you have a custom, basically, action figure that will look like, you're the character that you have in mind. And so in this case, it's a character from my book. And when you add motion, when you add joints in there, you have to kind of figure out how are you going to make it so that one, like it doesn't necessarily restrict the range of motion. In this particular case, the character has these sort of like shoulder pad type things. So that means that his arm, in this case, can't quite move in a full 360 degrees like it might have been before. And then often if you're painting these things, if there's too much action or sort of wear, paint on paint, the paint will rub off. So you have to kind of plan for that. So there's some again, like little adjustments that you have to make based on the design of the character. So that was this. And then
so you're not mass producing him because he was a custom design on top of a pre-existing figurine.
Right. And so, but you can use the same process. So this is a example of a figure that was made from scratch. So what I ended up doing with this one, this is the same character, this one, Aurora, but she's in a different costume. And what I ended up doing is I found a figure that was, they're kind of like, I don't know if you have like, if you remember like Star Wars figures from like the 80s. Their arms would move, their legs would move, and their head would move, but that's about it. It was not too complicated. Everything was in like a one plane of movement. So I found some figures that were kind of like that. I found a female figure that kind of like was relatively, it didn't have a lot of like stuff, it could use it as sort of a blank canvas, essentially. And I started to do the same process, adding epoxy clay and so forth onto it until it kind of resembled what I wanted it to look like. And then I took the whole thing apart, and I made individual molds of all the parts. So the head, the arms, the legs, both halves of the torso, and I cast the whole thing out of resin. And so that essentially allowed me to make multiple copies of these style of figures. And so this is
then you'd have to assemble them after you demold them.
Right. So here's another one. Here's then you have to when you're done with everything, then you have to put it all together, and that kind of assumes that all the pieces fit together, because usually it requires a fair amount of finishing. So after you take it out of the mold, it's probably not perfect. You actually probably have to do a little bit of finishing, filing, and so forth to get everything to kind of be smooth. So the joints actually move. They do what you wanted them to. But the resin that you can make out there is pretty strong. It's not quite as resilient as like the ABS or PVC kind of stuff that they use for action figures that you buy at the store. But it'll handle a fair amount of abuse. The areas where it'll fail are often around the joints. So you have to plan a little bit how you want to make the joints. And that's the part that I fiddled a fair amount with, because that's the area that's under the most stress. But it's totally possible to essentially make your own action figures like these that are totally cast from resin, or to customize ones that basically are pre-existing in such a way that you can make multiple ones. And so if what I've done with some others is like this one here, this one has a whole box and everything like that.
Oh, did you do the whole box too?
Yeah, I did the box, the card back, and for this one. This is a character. This is a book, one of the books. It's a prequel to the 13th Hour. It's like a short little novella called The Shadow in the Moonlight. And so I wanted to do a character from that book. And so what I found was a character, or I found, I think, like these really generic action figures. They were really cheap. On like AliExpress or something like that, one of these like wholesale sites where you get the stuff directly from China, and each figure was like $2 or something like that. And I was like, okay, well, I can work with that. And yeah. This particular figure has a cape and like a cowl, sort of hood, and so I sculpted the hood. I painted everything. I added a cloth cape and some accessories, and so I was able to make multiple copies of this without having to I didn't have to mess with resin at all.
Oh, right, because you used the figures and you just applied the sculpting that you did to all of them and then painted them assembly line style.
Yeah, one after another.
So you created the designs and printed the card, the card that's behind him,
sure,
and the clear plastic, what is that, window thing that he's in?
Sure.
Did you make that too, or
no? You can buy these. Like you
can buy. Okay, so you can like buy that. I don't know what that is called. That plastic.
This blister pack type.
Okay,
thing.
Blister pack. Gotcha.
I found some ones that'll kind of like allow you to take it out, and then the figure will be like this. But yeah, you can buy all that stuff out there. There's tons of people who do this kind of stuff, and
it looks very professional.
Yeah, so when you're doing these kinds of things like that, you're not doing big runs of these things. You're not doing like, at the most you might do like 10 or 20 or whatever. I mean,
did you like take pre-orders so you knew how many to make, or
no, not really. I kind of had a sense like how many I could realistically do.
Okay,
then,
so then it became like a limited number available type situation.
Yeah.
Like you're getting let's say you made 10, so so each one that you would then sell would be numbered as like a limited edition or
right.
something.
Yeah, there's only a couple out there, like, because each one takes quite a bit of time.
Like,
this is one I just finished, and this is like
you should totally put this on like Kickstarter, but then you might get more orders than
exactly.
Yeah, you might be fulfilling it for an entire year because
one of the
there goes all your free time. You're now making figurines, but that could be interesting.
Yeah, so same idea. This one's for the Rocketeer. This is like basically anybody who buys one of these things. It's basically all proceeds go to the to a charity that the family of the creator of the Rocketeer, Dave Stevens, mans. So, but it's basically the same kind of deal. And I just did a couple of these because it was very involved, like to make the helmet and the rocket pack and all that kind of stuff like that to fit together.
It looks very cool.
Yeah.
It looks very professional. Like you could hang that in like a toy store and like no one would know.
Yeah, I think like that's the thing I think that a lot of people end up doing with these things is that if you go on and you look up like custom action figures, and you can go on any social media kind of thing and do that, a lot of these things are not really meant to be played with, oddly enough.
They're collector's items. Yeah,
people will get these and they probably won't even I made it so that you could open this package and play with all this stuff, but I think realistically the people who buy these kinds of things like that are adults. They're probably not going to play with it. They're probably going to stick it and pin it on a wall or something like that, and it's kind of just there as a display piece more than anything. So sort of the novelty of having it. For me, I was just like, well, I think it's cool to make it. I just want to make it.
I mean, it is art, it's definitely like, it's so well done. It definitely like it makes sense that someone want to display it, that it's art, that it's too nice to want to mess with.
Sure. Yeah. I think if you're, I don't think anybody will get rich doing any of this sort of stuff. I mean,
you never know. Like if somebody who has a lot of money and wants something very specific, and they you don't like, that's like that, like you can't put a price tag on nostalgia.
No,
like you know what I mean? Like if somebody who had a lot of money to burn and really wanted something very special in particular, and they were willing to pay for it, why not?
I think the hard thing is that even though you can't put a price on art, right? Your time, even though that's it, have a price. It does, like, for example, I think I did 6 of these things. I was just doing them here and there, but it took about a year, to do all this stuff. And then, so each one of these days I should actually track how much time it takes from start to finish. Like,
in case you ever get like a commission from somebody who wants something very specific, you'll know, well, to do the Rocketeer, it was X. To do this custom dude that I had to sculpt his hood and make him a fabric, cape, was this. Okay, so what he's asking for will be somewhere between the two or something.
Right, exactly. And so I think, you think about like, well, how much do you want to essentially charge for your time? So there are plenty of people out there that take commissions. I know many people who do, and they do excellent work. I don't really do any commissions. I just do it sort of for the fun of it. Half these things I end up just giving to people. But if you were going to do it, I think that way, you'd have to figure out like, okay, how much is my time worth? And then how much time do I want to invest in, like, if someone wants something very, very specific, then you have to think about like, okay, like, well, is there something out there already on the market that's kind of comparable? Can I base what I do off of that? And how much is someone willing to pay for that? I mean, so it's like, obviously the sky is open, if it's very rare or whatever,
or difficult to produce, if there isn't a base and you have to make everything from scratch.
Yeah. So I think often you're talking a sizable amount, because it's not necessarily like the just physically doing it. It's also acquiring the materials and also figuring out how it's all gonna
and testing
together and testing it. So like, what will will the arm be able to move if I have, if like the hairstyle is really huge, right? You have to figure out like, okay, well, how am I going to sculpt it in such a way that allows the arms to move in such a way that they can actually move and not get stuck. So yeah, it takes some doing, but it's definitely that. Essentially, that's what you're paying for as a customer. You're paying for someone to kind of figure all that stuff out, like that little engineering game. And then in the case of like the resin characters, you're kind of figuring out how someone is going to kind of like make that and reproduce it in such a way that they can get it out of the mold. And I think the other part of it is that
wait, would you say it, is it fair to say that half the battle of those resin ones is getting it out of the mold?
I think half the battle is designing it in such a way that it's actually possible to do. I think I should say like I think it's always possible. It's just that is it going to be, how much hair are you going to lose in and then I think the other part of it is that as a, I'm sure you know this, you have as a writer, you have a very specific vision of what these characters look like in your head. So translating that into something that is like a picture, right? A two-dimensional representation of that actually looks accurate, and the pose or whatever it is that you want to depict, there's that. But then there's actually creating it so that it actually looks realistic, like getting all the proportions right, and also whatever they're wearing and stuff like that. Because even if it's a two-dimensional picture, there's a side and there's a back, and there's the underside or whatever. So you have to kind of think about all those different little pieces depending on how detailed you want to make it and how big you want to make it. So those, for example, like if you like those little miniatures that they use for like Dungeons and Dragons and things like that, they're really quite detailed. So I mean, I imagine that they, it took somebody quite a lot of time to actually put in all those little details and so forth.
Oh yeah, and there's like was it Warhammer or
yeah.
There's a whole lot of there's a lot of miniatures, and then there's that Hero Forge where you can create your own.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So that's a great point. You don't necessarily have to do this yourself. You can have a company do it, and Hero Forge is a company that allows you to basically make your own characters. It'll put out a 20 or 30 millimeter miniature of a character that you design. Now they'll have some parameters, like they'll have like a bunch of things to choose from. So it's kind of like creating a character in a video game. It's not totally limitless, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, I have 2 of them. I just don't know where they went to. That somebody sent me of 2 of my characters.
Yeah.
I don't know where they went. They wander around my table. I don't know where they are.
Yeah.
I don't see them. They're off on an adventure.
they're off. Yeah. So it's totally possible. You don't necessarily need to do this yourself. The other thing too is I think like I'm doing this all manually, right? So I think like with 3D printing becoming so I don't want to say inexpensive, but I mean I don't have any basis to say that. But it's more accessible, I think, to the average person. In theory, like if you're able to create it on the computer, then you can just have the printer print it. I think there's a different set of challenges there. Is that you have to figure out how, are you going to be able to print it successfully? But on the other hand, it opens up a lot of windows, I think, for people to make a lot of this stuff without having to learn sculpting and mold making and all that other kind of stuff like that. So it's just a different medium. It's like traditional drawing versus photography. It's just different. I think sometimes people compare these different things, say, well, one is better, one is easier. I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily true. It's just different tools, different options that open up for you.
Yeah, and they lead to different outcomes.
They do. Yeah. It's possible to get with what I'm doing here, to get a very like smooth surface fairly easily right out of the mold. Now you have to do some work, to clean it up and so forth. But, with a 3D printed thing, the resolution is not high enough yet where it's going to be smooth. You'll see like little ridge lines. You could probably sand a lot of that stuff down, and, depending on how much work you are willing to put in to it. So, I'd imagine in future years, it might get to the point where you can't see those little lines.
That would be cool. Yeah, I'm sure the technology is only going to get better. I mean, it's used for not just for consumers, but it's used out in the wild for for manufacturing and things too. Yeah.
I think for me, like learning a lot of this stuff, I mean, aside from just a fun thing to do, it kind of opens up a lot of different possibilities, or has opened up a lot of different possibilities. When something breaks, and you're like, oh, you take it apart and you're like, oh, this little piece of it, whatever it is, broke. Now it's possible to actually reproduce that part without necessarily a ton of work. It depends on how much time you want to put into it and whether it's actually worth it or not. But if it's something that's not, you can actually make with a mold and then make your own copy of it, it's totally possible to do.
So you're the toy doctor now?
Well, let's just say, like, I have a lot of broken toys because I have 2 kids. I have a lot of broken toys. So I do end up fixing quite a bit of them.
Okay. So is there like a percentage of how many you've been able to rescue and save? I mean, how many are terminal cases?
Yeah, like, a lot of them, I would say majority of them. It depends how much time I want to put into it. Because sometimes honestly, it's probably not worth it. But like, I can think of like a couple examples. Our dog, when we just got him, like would chew on things. He doesn't do that anymore, but like chew off a leg of something, or chew off, Barbie's arm or something like that. These things can be fixed.
So you remade Barbie's arm and action figures' legs.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think I used that epoxy clay to do some of those things. I don't remember what I did for Barbie's arm. Maybe I found another arm that was similar. I was able to pin them together. I don't know. Like there's like, once you here's the thing. Like once you kind of get comfortable with it, you'll be like, oh, well, let me try this. And let me try that. And like you start to experiment with different things and just see what happens.
And then you too become the doll doctor.
You do, and like with enough work, enough elbow grease, like sanding this, painting that, like it's noticeable, like in some cases if you look hard enough, but it's good enough, But
for a little kid, like I think the fact that the arm is back is more important.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And it's a positive memory that Dad fixed this. Then it becomes special.
Yeah. Some of the things, like some of the toys are not really made to be fixed. They're made in such a way that you really can't take them apart very easily. And once they break, it's very difficult to get it back. But, you can usually do something. I remember my dad, when I was a kid, when I'd break a G.I. Joe or something like that, those things were not necessarily the most user-friendly things to fix. But he managed to do it in many cases. They didn't quite always work the same, but I don't think I really cared that much. So yeah, it's definitely possible to do.
That's really cool.
So
what's your next toy making project?
Well, I'm in what's the word? I have a couple things in the back burner, I guess. So these figures, these ones like this. So I have a music album that's coming out probably this fall. It's just 13th Hour music, and I'll probably release these figures as a special edition with that album. They'll come in like a. I have the figures done. I just have to finish the cover art for it, but they'll be in like a little clamshell VHS case with the figures and their accessories and stuff like that. So that's kind of like a project that's been in the works for a while. And then
wait, what kind of music will be on there, and where will people be able to get this?
So it's so when I was doing the writing the 13th Hour, I remember thinking that there were certain parts should be set to music, and it wasn't until later though that I started writing music for it. And so I've done one album that's out, and you can listen to that. It's on Spotify or Apple, or wherever you do that. It's called Long Ago, Not So Far Away. And but I post a lot of stuff on a platform for musicians called Bandcamp. And so a lot of indie musicians will post stuff there. It's free to post stuff there. You can also buy things there, but you can listen to it all for free. And so, but if someone wants the physical copy, like a tape, like a cassette tape or a CD or something like that, you can also buy it there too. And then, so I was thinking I would do that for this second album of more 13th Hour music, because I initially did 13 tracks, and I was like, well, 13 tracks is not enough. There's more. There's more ideas in there. So,
and what style of music is it?
I would say like 80s. If you think of like 80s sound, like synthesizers and.
But like 80s, like hair metal, or like 80s pop music, or the 80s had wasn't like one style of music.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's a very good point. So I would say probably more like new wave, which if you think about like music, like there's so many different bands, like I don't know, Duran Duran, or the stuff that you would hear in a lot of like teen movies, I guess you could say. Like, there's so many bands that kind of fall into that category. But yeah, it kind of sounds kind of like that, I would say. And they're all songs or instrumental kind of things that go with parts of the book. And so the one that we talked about before, An Empty Hands, I actually experimented with actually including links in the book where you could click on it or tap on it, and then it would go to an external site, and then you could play the music while you're actually reading the book, which is how I intended it to be. That didn't exist, though I didn't know how to do that back when I created the 13th Hour. But
that's cool.
Yeah, so, it's not seamless, right? Because Kindle doesn't have a music playing kind of thing, but maybe some other platform will in the future. I don't know.
That would be cool. And are you working on a sequel to the 13th Hour?
Yeah, so I am, and some of the songs and stuff like that I've written are for those upcoming stories, and some of the characters, some of the way these characters look, the toys are essentially the clothing and the things that they'll be carrying and wearing in those books.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Are you going to have like, will someone be able to order like a physical copy of the book and get the figurines, or is it only with the CD?
Yeah. So I guess all the above.
Okay. That's very cool.
Yeah.
He's got an SD store. He's being really shy and not telling you this, but he has an SD store with lots of really neat. You can see a lot of the figurines on there. So if you're listening and you want to get a visual and you don't want to hop over to YouTube, I'll put the link to the YouTube video so you can also see them. But if you wanted to check out the SD store and see the figurines and in the blister pack with the card, it looks very professional. Like if you wanted to go and look at that, the link is in the description of the show notes, as well as the link to the 13th Hour podcast and his author page, so you can check out the books.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I think it's so if you're listening and you're an author and you want to create your own, if you're thinking about that, you want to be able to hold it in your hand, your own character.
Or a reader, you want to hold your favorite character in your hands, and there is no figurines or anything, because there's not that many books that, like, I mean, the Lord of the Rings has it, and like some of the big properties. But if you're in love with like a book that doesn't have that kind of merch and you're crafty,
You can totally do it, I think. And feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about how to go about doing it. There's actually a lot of stuff out there. It's a very helpful community of people who do this. I think because like, you know, with toys, you're thinking about playing and it brings out the kid in everybody, even adults, you know, we still like to play, just that, you know, we have less avenues and social acceptance for doing so. But I think like it's a very accepting and helpful community out there. Of people who do this sort of stuff. So, you know, anybody who does it, you know, generally you can ask questions, you know, they'll tell you. There's not really a whole lot of secrets because the information is out there. We all kind of learned mostly by ourselves. I don't think anybody teaches a class on how to do this, or there's no real books, I think, written on about how to do this in the nitty-gritty that you can find on all the for free stuff on YouTube and tutorials on the internet. So, you know, most people are really very helpful and very willing to share their their experiences,
which is very cool.
It's a little bit different. Yeah, I would say it's more, I would say, of the different communities that I've belonged to, you know, when it comes to this creative stuff, it's the most positive one that I think, because I think many of the people who make toys also like to collect them. I'm not a big collector, but many of them do. But many of them have a lot of nostalgia, I think, for things that they grew up with and want to do the same, like sort of create physical things, you know. So it's not, I have not found it to be very negative, where there's a lot of backbiting and stuff like that. So it's a little bit different than, it's very different than the music communities I've been in. Certainly very different from the author communities. Like you go on the author websites and forums.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Oh God.
So, like there are corners of the author world that are, you know, welcoming, but there's a lot of corners that are, especially lately with all of the changes that have been going on, there's a lot of negativity lately, a lot of backlash, a lot of anger that's being misdirected at other authors when we have absolutely no control over what Amazon does. We have no control over what Facebook does.
Yeah.
We have no control over the AIs, you know, in being integrated into everything. And I really wish that other authors would take a look around at their peers and realize that we do not have any control over any of this. So directing the anger at all these things at your fellow author we're not competition to each other. And I wish other authors would stop looking at each other as competition, because we are not competition. Readers read far more books than we will ever publish, you know, most readers. There's no way one author's catalog can satisfy and one reader, you know, just, we're not competition, you know?
I think you know,
and that's great that the makerspace doesn't see it that way, that they don't see other makers as competition. And that's what it sounds like, that they see everybody as kind of belonging to this space of people who like to create things for the sake of creating them.
It's not something that I can necessarily put into words as an intangible, but it's a different feel. The sort of like anxious tension of like, are people going to like this? Am I going to make a sale or not? And like, you know, getting ahead and you're ranking and you're building your audience and all that kind of stuff like that. I don't know. I just haven't seen it there, because it's like, oh, wow, you made this thing. That's really cool. Yeah. Like there might be like, can I buy it, or where can I, you know, that kind of stuff like that. But a lot of it's just like, wow, that's really cool. Like, how did you do that? Or
but that's a good feeling when someone asks you, like, where can I buy that? I like that so much, I must collect it. Right. You know, I'm giving up valuable space in my place to have something that you spent your time. I think that's like a really wonderful thing that like other makers would, you know, or people who are like browsing through the maker spaces and wanting some of these items. I think that's really awesome. And like, I wish we'd go back to that positivity, but lately, like as the election stuff, as the summer, you know, as book sales slump in the summer, as they always do, as they have every year, and every time there's a political debate or something political going on with Biden or Trump, book sales slump, because everybody is just not looking. They're not shopping for books when these things are going on, and people flip out and go crazy. And I'm like, this is the way it's always this way. Like, why are you getting upset and you know, putting vitriol on other people? We're not, you know, we can't make people go buy books because you want sales, you know?
No, I know.
That's not how it works.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the community itself of people who enjoy toys and making things, just, you know, making stuff in general, it doesn't have to be toys. It could be other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is a pretty positive one, a pretty welcoming and positive crowd. So, you know, if you have any, I think if any interest in that sort of thing and you know, making some of these things in a physical capacity, I think you'll find a pretty welcoming group of people.
That's really neat. And where's the podcast headed? Do you talk about this on your podcast?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, totally. I often will, you know, as I was making, like, for example, this guy, I was making Logan. I forget which year. It's been a number of years since I did this, but I remember recording a podcast episode about this. I was like, well, I'm going to try this. You know, I've done whatever research I can. We're going to try doing it. And sometimes I've recorded as I was sculpting.
Oh, wow.
Like, hey, I'm going to try this, you know. Just in the past 2 weeks, I've tried the whole live stream kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something I knew how to do before. I still don't really know how to do it very well, but where I'm working on something and it's recording at the same time. But going back a couple of years, I started doing that with this sort of stuff because I could be working and filing something or sculpting and then also be narrating the process at the same time. And so some episodes are that way. And a lot of them are about essentially works in progress.
Okay. So like letting people know where you're at. So
yeah, totally.
When is the next episode of the 13th podcast and what's it about?
The next episode, well, they come out every week.
Okay.
So every Monday morning. And so I have one that's going to be coming soon. It's one I recorded with my brother. We often will talk about like fantasy movies and stuff like that. There's ones that are probably going to be in probably the next couple of weeks that are related to. I have a series of some more of these figures to make.
Okay.
So this is, I'm holding up, for the people who are not on video, I'm holding up a custom Rocketeer action figure. And it came from a story, like a fan fiction story that I wrote. And so I have...
which, he's being modest. He has a fan fiction story that he turned into a choose your own adventure game that you can play for free on Twine. He didn't give me a link to that, but he was telling me about it before the show. And I think it's really cool. And I think you should tell listeners about it.
Yeah. So this is a whole story in itself. So one of the guests I had on the podcast, like maybe 2 years ago, was the actor Billy Campbell, who plays the Rocketeer. And for that episode, I created a little story where we could do kind of like an interactive, essentially choose your own adventure style story. That was kind of like an unofficial sequel to the film.
Oh, wow.
Just for fun.
I love that film.
You know, just something where it wasn't just like saying, so where are you from? And, you know, it's this sort of back and forth kind of stuff like that.
Yeah. That's so neat.
Story. And eventually I was like, okay, well, you know, maybe I should do something actually with that story. And I turned it into an actual text-based, you know, fully fleshed out, choose your own adventure style story. And I put it up on this platform called Wattpad, which took it down. They didn't like it for whatever reason. I don't know why. Maybe
did you put it in AO3? Because like that's made for fan fiction, and I'm sure there's a Rocketeer fan fiction in there somewhere.
I didn't find any, but they have a habit of taking stuff down. So the title of the book is Rocketeer versus the Third Reich. Maybe they didn't.
Maybe that's it. Yeah.
Might have flagged somebody, you know.
You need to be subtler about the Nazi fight.
Right. So maybe they didn't like it was fan fiction. Maybe who knows? I don't know. But I was like, okay, well, they took it down from there. I eventually, because of that, I ended up finding that there are whole platform, and there's one called Twine. There's others out there that are made specifically for creating choose your own adventure style stories. And I created it, or sort of modified it for that particular platform. So essentially it's like a text-based adventure game. And so I have the pieces, but I have to make the enemy figures for the Rocketeer to go with the story, because I have the Rocketeer and the enemy rocket men that come up in that story.
Are you going to send one to Billy Campbell?
So this one I haven't sent to him. I sent some other ones. Yeah.
Okay.
He actually lives in Norway, and I sent some for him and his kids. And,
did you get a reply back?
I did. Yeah. His kids are about the same age as mine. And so, I made some little Lego style Rocketeer figures and things like that. I branched out into that as well. And so, yeah, that was fun. So these particular ones like this are, I guess, a part of a tube. Well, in the back of it, you can see it says collect both, and one is the Rocketeer, and one is
the other one doesn't exist yet.
Does not exist yet. It only exists in parts, in pieces, and so I have to create the packaging and the final product for that. So
that's going to be an upcoming episode where you tackle that. Probably
many episodes, because each of these things takes so long, and I only can work on them in little chunks. I can't, if I were to do it, start to finish all at once. I'm very, very curious to see how long it takes, but I have not recorded that process to actually see hour by hour, how long that would take. But it does usually end up taking quite a few months at least for each of these things to be done.
Oh wow!
So that's probably some things to come on the podcast in the next couple of months.
So what's Monday's episode? Because this episode is going to publish tonight. So the early listeners will know what's coming on Monday.
Melinda, I don't know. I don't know yet.
I guess you're going to record it on Monday and then publish it.
No, I usually record it I usually record it sometimes a week or two in advance. Sometimes when people record podcasts, I don't know what you do for you. They're several weeks in advance.
And then publish it.
But for sometimes I'm a little later than others, and it's not it's Sunday night, and I'm well, I have to record something, and so there's always things to do.
Okay, so tomorrow, whatever comes to mind tomorrow is what the episode will be.
Yeah. So I'm not 100% sure. What I was actually thinking of doing, and I don't know if this will necessarily work. I don't know if you remember way back in the day as a kid, did you ever have one of those games where it was like water in a little container, and you had to push buttons to get rings into?
Oh yes, I remember that from when I was little.
How frustrating those things were.
Those were annoying.
Yeah.
That's why I think that's why my parents bought them, because this is annoying. This will keep them busy for hours, because they won't be able to get the rings to go wherever it was supposed to go.
So I was thinking of actually making a 13th hour version.
It's like a maze, if I remember. You have to.
Some of them are mazes.
It's air pushes the rings.
Yeah, so I was thinking of making a 13th hour version of one with a
that was our Nintendo. That was our video game when we were very little.
That was a poor man's Nintendo.
Yeah.
You didn't have a Nintendo, or your parents were like, no, you can't have that. Here's something that you could get at the store for a couple of bucks. And so I was thinking of doing something like that.
And it looks so easy, because that's what sucks you in. You're like, oh, this is easy. It's going to take 30 seconds. 2 hours later, you're still trying to get the stupid thing.
Yeah. So
you're like, I can't quit now. I can't let this game beat me.
What I was trying to do, actually, was earlier today. Is I found a bunch of those little things like that, and I was trying to crack open the case to remove the little rings to actually and replace them with other things that are a little bit more 13th hour specific. So in the book, the 13th Hour, the infinity sign.
Yeah. Is it actually water inside, or is it, because it was always blue, and I was like, is it actually dyed water, or is it something else?
So I think some of them are water, some of them are actually oil, but
okay.
But these ones that I got very cheaply off of Amazon, I think meant to be filled with your own water.
Okay.
And but I was not able to crack open the case successfully enough. So the plastic keeps splitting. So I don't know. We'll see if that ends up becoming Monday's episode. That might be a future episode.
You might have to create your own.
Yes, I might have to. I don't know. I might have to not necessarily go with my initial idea. I might do something slightly different. We'll see. So
it could always be a ping pong thing too, because then you just need a spring and a thing to shove it.
Yeah,
you don't need water.
That's true. Yeah. So I think a lot of times when I do an episode, like sometimes it's like I record something, I try it, it doesn't actually, whatever I'm trying, because a lot of these things are physical things that I'm trying to make, whatever, it doesn't necessarily always work. And then I have to come back to it later. So like, okay, well, this is part one. There might be a part two in the future when I actually get this to work.
Mm-hmm. Or this might be the only part because it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It's not worth pursuing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think between like toy making and music and like the experimenting with games and illustration, there's a lot of different media out there, and not all of it is able to be wrapped up nicely in a 30 or 60-minute episode. So sometimes it takes a couple of weeks or sometimes months. I got to let it go for a while before I can come back to it and, with fresh eyes.
So if you check out the 13th Hour podcast on Monday, who knows what you will find?
Yeah, whatever I was able to pull together.
Now you have to do it. You can't skip this because we announced in here that there was going to be a podcast.
That's true. I don't actually, I was thinking back. I was trying to think if I've ever missed an episode because I've been doing it for about 10 years now. I was trying to think if I've ever missed one. I don't think I have.
Oh, wow.
I don't think so. I don't think I've ever just canceled it or whatever. Even when I go away or whatever, I generally try to have something in the can ready to go, scheduled or whatever. So I don't know. It's just like a thing. It's just like, I don't necessarily think about it. I mean, I have to think about it in order to do it, but I know that come Sunday night or Monday morning, that's just the time it gets released.
That's cool. I've had weeks where there weren't an episode because I had a family event and it just wasn't available, and I just can't. I work full time, so if I'm not present at home at the times when I usually would record the podcast, and there isn't a podcast because that's the only time I have to do it. So if I'm not there, it doesn't get done.
But I will usually work around it. I've certainly done it in many a hotel or whatever. I record it, edit it. I mean, on the road. So at this point, though, it's just kind of a thing. I just know that that's something I kind of do. It's like I don't have to.
I'm not going to try and record it when my nephew is around and there's a bunch of screaming children. I don't think anyone would want to hear that episode.
No, yeah. But it's just kind of a thing like I do at this point.
No, that's really cool. I just write books. I don't do toys. I think it's very cool. I think it's very cool to have figurines of some of my characters, but I know my limitations, and sculpting is definitely not a thing that I am any good at.
Well, the good news, I think, is that if you ever did want one of those things, there's plenty of people out there who would probably be happy to make you one. And so,
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right now, I'll live with the hero. I have a little hero forge thing of him, so I'm good at the moment.
Yeah.
I don't know where he went. He's off on some adventure on my desk, and I'm not sure where he is. He's probably lost in the enchanted forest. I have these little trees from CVS that light up. There's like a dozen of them representing my enchanted forest. I think he's somewhere in there.
Well, maybe for a Christmas present, I'll make you a little sarn or something like that.
That'd be very cool. But that probably would take you forever.
Yeah, if I had limitless time, that's probably what I would do. But yeah. No,
it's very cool.
It's for me. it's more fun. I don't like, I have to say, like, you know, the process of selling things and whatever, I don't really like that. But I like making things. And so that's the joy for me. And there's something, at least for me, different about doing things with your hands than it is in front of a computer. So.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I was, like I said, I was very interested in, I saw people who would put the flowers in the resin and get very cool things. And like, I tried that, but the flowers died.
Yeah. I think there are things like that are manageable though, because like, I think if you start small, then you'll branch into bigger things. So maybe it's like, I don't know, like what are things like making bookmarks or something like that. You could make bookmarks, then you might branch out into, you know, I don't know, what's the next thing beyond that, but you might make, you know, more elaborate ones, or maybe you might start making, you know, prints of, you know, of things, where you might start making earrings, or, you know, little things that are sort of connected to your books in some way. Like there's an imagery that you kind of have in there or whatever. I think there's definitely ways that many people can do it if they're like, oh, I don't think like I can illustrate things, or I don't want to get into making like large physical things. Like there are sort of like side things that I think you can easily do without a ton of like training or hassle.
I'm just happy holding a copy of a book that I have written in my hands. Like
that's pretty
that
special,
seems that is a tactile, physical item, and like the book isn't real until I'm holding it in my hands. So the book that I finished a couple of weeks ago is not real yet. I'm not holding a physical copy of it. It hasn't arrived from the printer. It doesn't really exist yet.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. I agree with you. I'm 100% there with you.
Yeah. I have like actually rush printed and paid exorbitant fees just to get a copy of the book by the time it came out on retailers, so I could hold it in my hands.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, there's something pretty special about that.
I was tempted to do that with this one, but it's already costing a lot more than usual because I showed you there's the gold foiling and all that. But
looks beautiful. Yes.
I want it. I really want to hold it in my hands.
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking like you could like take a book and like actually, well, you could. I couldn't. I don't sculpt. You could actually sculpt the character on the cover.
You could
like make the cover like a 3D tactile sort of thing. You might have to reinforce the cover. Maybe you do that with a hardcover.
Yeah. It's like those books you buy in the airport that have like the bumpy kind of like cover,
you know? Well, like you could have like a 3D the character, like we could have the whole cover be like tactile and like 3D and sculpted.
Totally. Yeah.
You could. I don't think I think that's beyond my abilities.
I bet that's something that probably again, like, you know, would be possible to do. Like I bet some of your readers, if you wanted to do that, I bet you could find a reader that could help you with that. Because like, you know, like I said before, like with 3D printers and stuff like that, if you have an image and someone's able to translate that into a digital file, then you can have it printed.
Yeah, because I think that would be very cool to have a tactile cover, or the edge paintings, not the printings or the sprayed edges, the one where somebody like paints like a scene from the book on the edge of the book.
Yeah.
I think that's very cool. That's where I go with the tactile stuff, is to make the book pretty.
Well, I think you totally. I think you would have to probably do this by hand, but
you probably also have to have some artistic skill.
I think like if you have like with your book like this, right?
Yeah.
If you were able to paint like scenes, like
usually the ones that I've seen on TikTok, they have the edges like this.
Yeah.
Like, wait a minute. Like that.
Yeah.
Where it's like the book is kind of curved, so you see it, but when it's flat, you don't see it as much. And then when you open it, you get and the pages are, you know, whatchamacallit, like at an angle, you see the whole scene. I've watched those TikToks way too many times. The girl who cool. does that. It's like four-edge painting, I think it's called. And the way she does it, when it's closed up, you don't really see it. You see something, and then when you open the book, or you feel like, you know, get the edge of the pages to be sort of, what is that called? Like not straight up and down, but like at like an angle. That's the word. Then you see it reveals the painting, and I think it's very neat.
Oh wow, I didn't even know that existed. Interesting.
She's done the Lord of the Rings. She's done whatchamacallit, Game of Thrones. Probably done other ones, but those I think she's done some Sanderson ones.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating.
That's really cool. I'm looking at that right now.
It's very neat.
Oh, there you go. There's a new thing to experiment with.
And you have the artistic skill. I'm really good with like computer art, like playing with things in Photoshop. Not so good at taking blank canvas and paint or pencil or anything and getting a good result. I don't know why, but for some reason I can do it on computer, but I can't when it comes to like physical media. The brain there's just some disconnection.
Yeah.
There's also no erase tool like there is in Photoshop. If you make a mistake in reality, it's a little bit harder to remove things if you make a mistake on a real situation.
Yeah.
But
that is
so that's something else for you to play with.
I know, right?
So you'll come back in a year and be like, look what I did. Some like painting of. Yeah,
exactly.
There'll be a 3D sculpted cover, and then you'll angle the pages and be like, look at that. Look at that.
Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah. So many things you can do. And I saw something about an author who does, like the resin like you do, and sculpts like not as detailed as you do it, the bookmarks.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
because I think one easy way to do this is that if you were going to do bookmarks like that, and I've done this, is to print out something that you want, like for example, like your name, your author, like website, and then like maybe an image of some of your books or whatever, and then have that as a piece of paper, and then make have the mold of the bookmark, however you're going to do it, pour the resin in, stick that little piece of paper in there so it's embedded in the liquid resin.
Okay.
Cool. And now you have like this bookmark that is relatively thin, but it has a little bit of a design in there that's embedded in there.
Oh, maybe that's what she does. I'm not sure.
You could also embed other things in there. You want to put like a feather or a glitter or whatever.
That's neat. Now I'm thinking about all the like bookmarks in Barnes and Noble.
Yes. Yeah. So with some playing around, you can actually start to make your own kind of like that.
That's really neat. Too bad I destroyed the table.
Yeah. But I mean, it's something that I think once you kind of get the hang of, and you have to find obviously the right resin and the right area to do it, but there's lots of ones out there that are pretty user friendly, and you can buy them.
They're not cheap. They get kind of expensive.
They can get kind of expensive, but again, if you find the right one, it's going to be manageable, and you're not using a lot at any one time, right? And so.
Maybe that's where I went wrong. I used the whole bottle.
Well, again, like I said, like there's lots of like people out there who've luckily done it before, and so you basically just had to see what they use and then start, kind of like, well, whatever.
That was my first mistake. I didn't even see what other people did. I saw this one TikTok. It was like, I can do that. No, I can't.
Yeah. Yeah, but you can. I think you can. I think you totally can. But like anything, it takes some time. It takes some.
Yeah.
So
maybe next time if I get some time, but like lately, if I have time, I write.
Well, there you go. There you go. Yeah.
That's how I make things. I make more books, so I have to pay more exorbitant fees to get copies. So I can hold them in my hands. Hug them tight.
This is one thing that's a combination of the two, I think, that I was actually thinking of doing, is that to make tiny little miniaturized versions of your books, because all you would need to do is print out a small copy.
Oh, like the book charms. Yeah.
So you can make earrings, you can make like, a pendant or whatever, but it would be, relatively small, an inch, maybe 2 inches or whatever.
That'd be very cool. Now I might have to buy a printer. Because I always thought that would be very cool to have like a charm bracelet with the books. Although at some point it would stop being a bracelet and become a necklace because I've already got 27 books.
That's true. Yeah.
At a certain point, we either have to stop adding charms or go to a larger canvas. Yeah.
But that was something I was thinking about playing around with and potentially putting on a podcast, as I experiment.
Yeah. There was an Etsy store that you couldn't put your own. It was they had a selection of like top sellers, and I was like, but I want mine.
Yeah. So, yeah.
That would be very cool.
Maybe another thing to play around with in the future.
Yeah. Not for me. I have to get a new table first for the outside. Then I can destroy it. Then I can destroy it anew.
There you go. Yeah,
or try not to destroy it this time.
Yeah.
The resin didn't destroy the table. It was rusting, and it I don't know if the resin kicked it over the edge because it hardened and made the thing heavy, but it started to have structural integrity issues after that.
Yeah. A garage. If you have a garage, that's actually a nice place to do a lot of this kind of stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you can just open the door and, if it doesn't work out, right into the trash bin it goes. So.
That's true. That's true. This has been awesome. Is there anything else you want to say about the 13-hour podcast or toy making? We've been on for like 90 minutes now.
Yeah, so
sensitive to your time.
So you can find out more information about any of this stuff. It's on my website, 13thr.wordpress.com, or just if you look up Joshua Blum on whatever social media platform you use. I'm on most, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And I often will put stuff in there that I'm working on. So not just final products, a lot of times stuff that's in progress.
That's really neat. And we've got links to all that in the show notes and description. So if you don't have to write it down right now if you're driving, or if you're driving, I hope you're paying attention.
Pay attention to the road.
Yes. Well, and also to us, we're important too. We're not sitting in the car with you, so also be mindful of what's going on around you as you are listening. Yeah, this has been really cool. This is this episode got rescheduled a couple of times due to scheduling conflicts. I'm really glad we finally got to sit down and talk about it because I learned a lot. I hope listeners learned a lot. It's been very cool.
It's been a pleasure. It's always fun to talk to you.
Yeah, and you'll come back at some point, and we'll get an update on what new things you are making.
That's true.
Yeah. No, because I look forward. This is neat. So thank you so much, Joshua Blum, and he was here talking about the 13th Hour podcast and the process of making toys, which I found really fascinating. And you'll be back to talk about more interesting stuff at some point soon. So make sure you like, subscribe, follow, all the things so that you are notified when Joshua comes back to tell us what new thing he's working on. And we'll see. Yeah, we'll find out if it's any of the things we've been talking about in the last 10 minutes or so. If he's going to come back with an armful of book charms, or a 3D cover that he has sculpted, or the 4-edge painting that he is now a master artist at.
I got like a bunch of new things to think about.
Yeah. So Thank you. Have a great day or great night wherever you're listening.
Thank you.